Welcome back to the PS Pub. This'll be take 2 as I did not have my pop filter on the last time and unfortunately the audio was not salvageable. But like today's topic, just because it seems unsalvageable, you can always rebuild it from the ground up. A brand that needs little introduction, but LEGO has been a staple in pop culture for decades, constantly finding new ways to keep its brand fresh through new mediums while still maintaining its core identity. One of those brand expansions being in the form of LEGO video games, which even then has multiple identities as well. Prior to the release of LEGO Star Wars LEGO games, for the most part were very experimental in the different types of genres it would partake in out there. Post LEGO Star Wars, we'd see a formula that even today still works extremely well and is comfort food of sorts for a lot of fans. So today I wanted to take a quick look at all the LEGO games on offer for the PSP. Similar to the Ben 10 video, this doesn't mean I won't be doing more in-depth reviews of each of these in the future, so look at this as more of an overview as to what's on offer. No drinks today, instead I'll heal my body up with a Capri Sun and embrace my childhood once more as we delve into the various LEGO games, starting with LEGO Star Wars 2: The Original Trilogy. It's very apropos that a LEGO Star Wars game started off the franchise on Sony's Handheld, given the massive success of the first LEGO Star Wars game. Released on September 12, 2006 in North America, but interestingly enough, certain versions actually released a day earlier in the UK. As the name suggests, you'll take control of different LEGO characters as you play through the original trilogy of Episode 4, 5, and 6, all while collecting studs and unlocking different characters to play as. One of the things I appreciate about this game from the onset is that after playing through the first level of Episode 4, which acts as a tutorial of sorts, you'll automatically gain access to Episode 5 and 6. This is awesome because it means you're not beholden to experience the original trilogy in order and allows you to jump to different points in the story. I think this was a smart move as it gives the players more freedom to jump around to different points in the story and doesn't bog them down on a linear path. Things are pretty straightforward here. As you play through the various episodes, you'll unlock more chapters, which in turns unlocks more characters with different abilities to use. You can also unlock more characters by collecting studs and buying them at shops. Not to mention, you also have the ability to create 2 original characters with all the different parts you collect. Graphics wise, this port is pretty comparable to its console counterpart of the time, with the graphics and textures holding up fairly well. Not to mention the game plays in 60 FPS, and for the most part there wasn't any crazy slowdowns or anything like that. The only time I found any happening was when there was a lot of characters on screen and in combat. Specifically, this happened a few times at Jabba's palace, but it was quick to correct itself. I don't know if this is something that happens a lot in game, but it wasn't too noticeable for me, at least on this initial playthrough. Gameplay is fast, fun, and extremely addicting, as even just scratching the surface on this one, I found I wanted to just keep playing, collecting more studs and unlocking more characters so I could find all the secrets in the game. Being completely honest though, there are a couple things that I wasn't the biggest fan of after spending a couple hours with the game. The first of which, and the thing that stood out the most, is that the lightsaber controls are pretty stiff. Essentially the square button is used for blocking and attacking. However, to me it feels like how they should have set this up is backwards, as tapping square allows you to block, and by pressing harder and holding the square button allows you to swing the lightsaber. I felt more often than not I was getting completely overrun by lasers shooting LEGO characters than actually doing anything to them. It was pretty noticeable, and it made me want to avoid Force users in general more so than the others because they more likely than not had lightsabers. Although funny enough, it is kind of hilarious that the Gamorreans feel the wrath of Luke via a Force choke, but he spares the others in the game. Poor Gamorreans. The second of which, and is probably just because it's not my thing, but it's that I do not enjoy the vehicle combat in this game, and a lot of these early LEGO games to be fair. I spent a good majority of footage collection for this game just playing the Hoth level, or rather being blown up in the level. As a first impression, I can appreciate the variety and additional game modes, but like I said, I never enjoy the vehicle combat in these early games. Perhaps when I go back and give this one an in-depth review that'll change, but for now, to me at least, the legendary platforming and destructive gameplay is what's on showcase here, and on that front I think it does deliver. I remember after LEGO Star Wars 1 originally came out wondering if the original trilogy would translate just as well as a LEGO game, but I think it does very well. It's interesting to think since then that this was the second in the long and storied history of this franchise that would span so many different games from different franchises on different consoles. Back then we had no idea just how big this franchise would become with all the different crossovers, but it's great to see it happen. After the release of LEGO Star Wars 2: The Original Trilogy, we'd have to wait until 2008, where we would see a wave of these rush onto Sony's portables, starting with LEGO Indiana Jones, The Original Adventure, released on June 3rd, 2008. I remember hearing about this game and my initial thoughts being, that makes sense since it's another Lucasfilm property, but how is that going to work at all like Star Wars? Similar to my initial opinion on how well the original trilogy would translate into a video game, Indiana Jones slips right into the over-the-top slapstick comedy while still keeping the addictive gameplay of the Star Wars games, but adding enough new things here to keep the whole experience fresh. Similar to the original trilogy, Original Adventures sees you playing through the first 3 Indiana Jones movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, and Last Crusade, starting with the iconic opening scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark, after which the subsequent films are open for you to play. One of the cool things with these LEGO games is that they each have unique hub worlds that pertain to each franchise. Here we get the Barnett College, and similar to Mos Eisley's Cantina of the previous games. We can access the 3 movies here as well as character unlocks, etc, etc. One of the nice things I liked about Barnett College is that even after completing the first level, there are college students walking around and even sitting in on classes. It's a small detail, but I think it goes a long way. In terms of the details and such as well, you'll notice that the graphics here are a significant upgrade to the original trilogy on PSP. From the textures all the way to the nice lighting effects. The graphics are great here, and not just that, as pretty much everything is improved upon from the previous LEGO game. The hand-to-hand combat is smooth here and works great. Not to mention, the additional puzzle-solving feature mechanics are a welcomed addition here, making you feel like you're a part of the Indiana Jones experience. Next up, LEGO Batman. Released on September 23rd of 2008, about a week removed from the 2-year launch of LEGO Star Wars 2, the original trilogy. This one is interesting for quite a few reasons. It was the first of these new LEGO games to not be a Lucasfilm property, and it would eventually go on to spawn a successful film franchise in its own right. But also, it was the first time in these LEGO games where the story itself would be a wholly original work as far as the story goes, opposed to being based off of a series of movies. Combining elements from all aspects of the Batman mythos, being more of a celebration of the brand as a whole, but clearly taking the most inspiration from the animated series and Tim Burton films. Funny enough, relatively recently it was announced we are finally getting a LEGO game based off of the different Batman films available, so I guess almost 2 decades later we finally have come full circle. This LEGO game actually in a lot of ways sets the foundation for future games in the franchise, like the popular Avengers titles and original storied games. Still, I won't lie, at first it was a little strange playing this as this was prior to the film and LEGO Batman himself hadn't gotten his voice yet. It's not a deal breaker or anything like that. I think there can even be an argument to be made that the voiceless LEGO games have a completely different charm to them, relying more on over-the-top expressions and slapstick humor. Kind of reminding me of early slapstick silent films and such, but I digress. This LEGO Batman game sees the Caped Crusaders rogues all escape from Arkham, and it's up to the Dark Knight and Boy Wonder to take them all down. The game itself still follows a similar formula in that you'll execute a lot of destruction throughout the levels to collect bits, solve puzzles, and complete levels. However, since this is a new story, the formula here is a bit different to other LEGO games. You'll gain access to different batsuits in levels in order to solve different puzzles in-game, and I think it's a nice, fresh way of playing the games overall, when going through the Batman and Robin portion of the story. The hand-to-hand combat here is also the crispest yet in terms of how well the fighting feels. You'll have access to punches with square and also grab attacks with circle, which can then lead to throws by pressing circle again or punching them with the square button. It's not the Arkham combat, but it's fluid, fast, simple, and honestly a ton of fun. Probably the biggest change overall is that now by holding the square button, you aim and throw batarangs at objects and enemies. This would later also be incorporated in additional LEGO games as well. After completing the first level, taking down Clayface, you'll now have access to the Batcave, and aesthetically, it's freaking awesome. I always love being able to just walk around and explore the Batcave in a lot of these games. Even in the very underrated, in my opinion, Batman and Robin for the PS1. And vibe and aesthetics in the cave for LEGO Batman here is great. Everything is neatly spaced out and easy to find. You'll also notice that they are still able to separate campaigns into 3 separate levels: Riddler's Revenge, Power Crazed Penguin, and finally Joker's Return. I really enjoy the fact that in order to access each level, you'll select a different Bat vehicle and then choose a level from there, with a lot of the major story beats being centered around that particular vehicle. I think it's really cool and just goes that extra mile in the flair and presentation department. They could have gone the cheap route, but I appreciate that they went all out to make this one as special as possible. Honestly, I had a great time with this one for the short amount that I played of it, so don't be too surprised if you see a more in-depth video on this one sooner rather than later, and quite possibly even next week, depending on how the editing goes. But still, after the release of LEGO Batman, we wouldn't see a new LEGO game released on handheld for more than a year, with the launch of LEGO Indiana Jones 2: The Adventure Continues. Launching on November 17, 2009, this game focuses on the most recently released film of the time in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and right away the game already feels off in comparison to everything else we've played so far. The title screen and loading into the game all feel different, and even the cinematic upon entering the game feels weird in comparison to the previous games. This is because gone are the in-game cutscenes. Instead, we have this one cinematic at the start of the game, whereas the rest of the cutscenes are relegated to storybook pages, but I'm getting ahead of myself. After the opening cutscene, we find that the game itself is a complete overhaul and change from the other LEGO games on the handheld thus far. Instead, the game looks and feels a lot cheaper, if that makes sense, in comparison to the other games thus far. Instead of feeling like a light version of the console ports, the game itself is completely rebuilt from the ground up. The 60 FPS is gone, as well as all the flair and staples of the previous games, and this is extremely noticeable right away when attempting to switch party members. You'll see that the fluid transition is gone now. There is a reason for this that is pretty simple. From here on out, all the LEGO games on PSP, according to the franchise's wiki, are ports of the DS and 3DS versions. This would explain the drastic change from LEGO Batman to this version of the LEGO games. Out of all the games we talked about today, this one, in my opinion, might be the weakest. However, although it's different and probably my least liked today, I won't say it's bad or anything like that. I feel like it would be easy to just say that the game is a horrible and travesty to LEGO games, but that's not entirely true. It still plays like a prototypical LEGO game. It just feels like the budget was severely reduced. Everything feels a bit choppier and smaller in scope. Once we do get into the quote-unquote plot, this really starts to show itself, as the opening level of the game in reality is just a pseudo-tutorial stage in order to get to the hub world. As it seems, the plot of the game is that Indiana Jones is marooned on an island and he needs to find a way off. I think. I didn't get far enough in the game when collecting footage and first impressions to find out. Along the way, you'll collect Indiana Jones journal pieces, which in turn are the actual levels in the game pertaining to the Crystal Skull. We get a few still images explaining what's going on, and then the level begins. What makes this feel a little cheaper is that unlike the other games, where the hub world directly ties into the levels, instead we need to press the select button in order to go to Indy's journal, and from there we access the level. It feels kind of sloppy, to be completely honest. The levels themselves, though, do follow the plot of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull for the most part, albeit they try to add the trademark LEGO humor here with the storybook panels. However, it doesn't really hit well for me. It tells the story, but none of the implied jokes here really land. It also makes me wish and long for the in-game cutscenes all over again. I think the magic of those other cutscenes was that they appeal to all ages and had a bit of depth to them. Here, everything just kind of feels basic at best. Functionally, everything is here for a quote-unquote traditional LEGO style game. However, all the flair and polish of the other games is lost on this one. Now, to be fair, they do try and add new things into the game to keep it fresh. Stuff like challenge blocks where you need to perform a certain objective in order to gain artifacts. Stuff like racing the clock and dodging obstacles a set amount of times. It helps to at least break up the monotony a little bit. On top of that, the combat isn't too bad, albeit it's gone back to being a bit more stilted than prior to LEGO Batman. It's a little jittery, but so far from what I played, it's not horrible or anything like that, and it's completely playable. In truth, I don't think the game is bad necessarily, only in comparison to what we've played up to this point. It's a bit of a letdown letdown, especially after playing LEGO Batman. However, I can say if you played this one growing up or are nostalgic to it, I can actually see you having fun with it and it holding a special place in your memories, as it is a LEGO game after all. I also do appreciate that they tried something new with the way the storytelling was presented here. I wasn't the biggest fan of taking out cutscenes in favor of storybook stills, but they were at least trying something new here. Still, in my opinion, I did expect a bit more out of this one for the little bit of time I did spend with it. LEGO Harry Potter's Years 1 through 4, released on June 25th, 2010. Even though LEGO Indiana Jones 2 The Adventure Continues was a departure from what we had seen up to that point with the LEGO games and their old formula, Harry Potter Years 1 through 4 has become something else almost entirely. We've gone from a 3D platformer to a top-down action RPG of sorts. Setup-wise, you still have access to a hub world, and sure, the characters are still LEGO in form, and you will collect studs and such, but the core gameplay feels very different in comparison to the other LEGO games we have played up to this point. Starting with the obvious elephant here, but the camera is completely different. Without doing any research yet as to why they went with the top-down camera here, I'm guessing maybe because it would work best when developing for both the DS and PSP, creating a more flush game between both handhelds, but I'm only speculating there. If you happen to know why, definitely let me know in the comments below. Each section is broken down into small stages where you will have quests to complete, and in doing so, you will gain golden wizardry hats and other staples of the LEGO games like red bricks for cheats and all that. Combat is also severely toned down here, as you're limited to casting spells with the square button or doing a spin on your control stick in order to throw out a stun move. I'm not sure if you gain more attacks as you progress through the game, but initially I played through the first 5 levels of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and I wasn't even able to attack anyone until the 3rd stage. If it's just the one spell for attacking, I could see that getting old pretty quickly, especially since despite this being a top-down action RPG-like game, there are no power-ups or leveling. To be fair, there are a ton of characters to unlock and play as, so I imagine there's probably some variety in there gameplay-wise. I do know that, like other games in the series, different characters have different abilities, much like Hagrid is able to turn heavier objects, for example. You will also have access to these button-pressing mini-games here whenever you need to perform magic, like putting stuff back together or getting into Diagon Alley, for example. These button mini-games aren't terribly difficult or anything, but I can definitely tell that they were meant to be used for something like a DS. This is because the graphics and such all look like they would fit perfectly in a touchscreen scenario. I imagine these get more complicated as you play on, but at the very beginning they were painfully easy. Looking online, I noticed the Harry Potter LEGO games, specifically the handheld ones, tended to get lower scores and reviews to virtually every other LEGO game out there. I wouldn't call this a bad game off of my first impressions at all. It's different for sure, but I did have a little bit of fun with it, and despite it being different from what I was used to, I kinda enjoyed the new look and felt it was a bit fresher of an experience. Although time will tell once I go a bit more in depth on this game later. Still, I could see people having a fun time with this one if they grew up on it. And I think that's kind of the overall message with a lot of these LEGO games. I feel like if you grew up on any of these, you'll probably still have some nostalgia towards them, as they are all playable in their own right. LEGO Star Wars 3 The Clone Wars, released on March 22nd, 2011. We're back to the more traditional LEGO style games when it came time to play the 3rd LEGO Star Wars game. I will say it's more in line with Indiana Jones 2 than the traditional LEGO games, however this one runs much smoother and plays a lot better than Indiana Jones 2 did. Full transparency, this is an era of Star Wars I'm not the most familiar with. I knew of the Clone Wars animated series, but it wasn't something I really kept up with, unless it was stuff like The Force Unleashed and whatnot. This one is a bit weird at the onset as we start in the hub world, no cinematic or anything, and up to this point we always had some sort of establishing moment in the games. Even in Indiana Jones 2, we got an establishing cutscene before we fell into the hub world. It's a little jarring, but honestly I doubt you'd even notice like I am unless you were playing these back to back. Still, Still, this game does follow a linear structure in terms of its story progression. You have various planets that you'll travel to, and each one will contain different acts, which are your levels. There isn't multiple episodes to choose from and play through, at least none that I was able to see with the little bit of time I spent with this one. Now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure Harry Potter years 1 through 4 and Indiana Jones 2 were also the same, albeit they were a little more slick about hiding this. Indiana Jones had you hunting down storybook pages, whereas Harry Potter had the 4 separate years in the hub world. But even 5 levels in, I still hadn't gained access to the other years. Still, it's not a bad thing necessarily, as I can still enjoy a linear story. Plus, all the levels here and the previous games all still had free mode for you to go back and replay. Unlike the 2 previous games, which were a bit more experimental, Clone Wars goes back to the traditional way of doing things, albeit with a few changes from the previous 2 games. Your party is now changed via the shoulder buttons as opposed to changing with an active party running around, although you can still do so via the hub world when you happen to walk by someone you want to play as. I do think this one does a decent job here balancing the new gameplay mechanics with the legacy ones, even having stuff like holding the button down to aim and fire similar to LEGO Batman. Funny enough, I actually prefer the combat here over the combat in the original trilogy of Star Wars games. It feels a lot more fluid, lacking any sort of stiff moment, and overall, it's fun to play and control the characters, especially the lightsaber users. Clone Wars also has a couple different game modes and mini games to play, like the new starship flights and door hacking mini games. I felt like the starship fights were a bit disorienting at first, but after I got my bearings, it was okay. The hacking mini game, I'll be honest, took me way longer to figure out than I'd care to admit, but you essentially just spin the center to match the block on the right. For some reason, I thought I had to have the middle arrows point at the block required, but no, it was a lot simpler than that. I'd say this one isn't too bad and could be in contendership for the best quote-unquote DS era LEGO style games on handheld. Even the humor here is still pretty strong, if not a bit more spaced out in the gameplay. LEGO Pirates of the Caribbean, the video game, released on May 10th, 2011. I often forget this game exists, not necessarily because it's bad or anything. I'm a pretty big fan of the first 3 Pirates of the Caribbean movies. For me, it's that I didn't really ever have much exposure to any of the video games based on the franchise, save for like Kingdom Hearts 2.
But you have heard of me.
I'm a bit torn on this one. On the one hand, I appreciated the variety on offer here, as there are plenty of unique gameplay mechanics, not just tied to the characters, but the puzzle solving here is interesting. There's a bevy of interesting minigames that aren't too bad, and overall it feels like they were swinging for the fences with this one in terms of gameplay variety, and that is something that I can appreciate. Look here, there's even a mechanic to swim underwater to look for treasures and items for puzzle completion in the game. Still, I'm not the biggest fan of the fighting mechanics here. Essentially, the fights are more dynamic in that when you get into fights, the animation here is pretty lengthy, with guards seemingly blocking and parrying your attack. However, I found it would always be the same bit of back and forth before I'd ultimately take the enemy out. Unlike the fluid controls of the previous game Clone Wars, which I think would have played better here, honestly. It's not that the game is hard, as the other melee characters will usually just kind of stand there and patiently wait for you to slaughter their friends, but it becomes difficult to take on multiple enemies that have firearms at once if you're stuck in the fighting loop. I guess you could just shoot them instead.
But that's just plain nuts! Many of you out there are thinking, right?
Not to mention, there is a new duel feature, which again, I can appreciate the variety here, but it really just comes down to it being a QTE match, and I'm just not the biggest fan of QTEs. I don't hate them necessarily, but I felt like they were overused in this era of gaming, as they seemingly appeared everywhere. The trope itself got pretty old pretty quickly. Another thing the game does well, though, is that I think it combines both the DS era of these games pretty well with the legacy games, as the look and feel here does a good job in emulating the style of both sides of the games. We even have it to, after completing Port Royal from the Curse of the Black Pearl, you will gain access to Dead Man's Chest at World's End and on Stranger Tides. So at the very least, you don't have to worry about playing through every Pirates movie if you're just trying to play on at World's End as an example. To be fair also, and this goes for all the LEGO games I talk about today, you may not be looking for a similar experience to the other LEGO games out there. So if that's the case, you may find that the DS era of games are worth playing playing just for the fact that they are quite a bit different from the legacy games. I don't want to make it seem like these ones are inferior or anything like that. Although I do have my gripes for sure, and I personally enjoy the presentation and such of the legacy games a bit more. That doesn't mean you won't find some enjoyment here if you are a LEGO fan. Pirates may be one of those that grows on me over time, as I liked quite a bit on what was to offer here. It was the combat though that stuck out to me as something I wasn't the biggest fan of. Still, it could be something that gets better the more you play and engage with the title. The final game released on PSP was LEGO Harry Potter Years 5 through 7, launching on November 11th, 2011. When booting this one up, I was half expecting something similar in terms of gameplay to the previous Harry Potter game. However, this is more in line with the two LEGO games that preceded that. Gone is the top-down action RPG style of mechanics. Instead, we have a Harry Potter game that is similar in gameplay structure to the other LEGO games, with some changes to fit the world of Harry Potter. Next to the camera angle shift, the first big thing I noticed was that now triangle swapped your characters, and this was because now when playing as a wizard, you'll have access to different spells that you'll learn throughout certain points of the game. You can swap between spells by tapping the L and R buttons. I actually really like the fact that the game allows you to use different abilities in game and makes it easy to swap between those spells. You still also have different character types aside from just magic users, with strong type characters as an example. In a way, this game is kind of a hybrid of Clone Wars and Pirates of the Caribbean, with the updates to its gameplay mechanics and mini games, as there are quite a few here as well. We see stuff like utilizing animals to pick up items, but we also see that the fetching of items puzzle solving is here brought over from Pirates of the Caribbean. However, instead of grabbing an item the animal would like, we instead need to gather multiple items in order to craft a potion that will allow you to perform specific tasks in a level. We also see the addition of the wizardry duel mode, where you face off against others, where you need to aim either to the left or right and fire magic shots in order to hit your opponent. You can charge the shot by holding square and releasing the button, and you can deflect magic attacks by pressing X in the direction of an oncoming attack. When it comes to deflecting, you need to time the attack just right before it hits you, as if the timing is off, you won't get hit, but the magic will simply deflect off randomly. However, if you time it just right, it will bounce back at the initial spellcaster, and both of you will then have the chance to hit each other with the spell. The game mode reminds me a lot of tennis or ping pong actually, with the back and forths until someone makes a mistake. The gameplay mode on the surface is simple, but I actually kind of enjoyed this one a bit more than I thought I would. It could be because I'm a fan of tennis and ping pong in general, I don't know, but I ended up playing the first two circuits in the hub world against the students and open category before telling myself, okay, I need to jump off and save it for an in-depth video in the future, because if not, I'm going to end up playing the whole series of tournaments. The hub world is Hogwarts once again, and all the LEGO game staples are here. Plus, you will have access to the 4 different films, which, funny enough, they did split Deathly Hallows into both parts 1 and 2 instead of putting them together. In my opinion, despite kinda appreciating years 1 through 4 in their own right, I do feel like this one is a bit of a step up in comparison to the first of the LEGO Harry Potter portable games. However, I do think the pacing in this one level-wise is really weird. Up to this point, none of the LEGO games today really had issues when it came to level progression. However, here, everything just kind of feels weird. Take, for example, the first level of the game. You start off in the park, then you head to Harry's trial after he fought the Dementor, then the level ends at Hogwarts during a random magic lesson. This is all in one level, mind you, and it feels like instead of the levels organically flowing, it just kind of feels like a very loose Cliff Notes version of the source material. Which, I mean, fair enough, I suppose. That is kind of the point with the LEGO games in terms of their story, but in all the previous games, each level always felt like its own thing, if that makes sense. Whereas here, it's almost like they're stuffing as much as they can into each of the 4 chapters per year. The second level hammers this home, where at first you're at Hogsmeade, then we bounce to training in Dumbledore's army, and finally Snape's mind training. All scenes which I feel like could have been standalone levels in their own right. I think what hammers home the lack of fluidity here as well is that in order to finish a portion of the stage, instead of going through to a new area or something like that, you simply go to these Lego pieces here. Once that happens, you're brushed onto the next scene with no option to go back. It just feels like instead of having these levels to explore, we are instead forced to explore smaller sections, giving it a more more caged-in feel. Despite not being a big fan of the game's pacing, I do like the direction that this one was heading in, and I enjoyed the addition of the dual mode here. Was it better than Clone Wars or Pirates? I'd say no, and I'd argue between Clone Wars, Pirates, and this one that Harry Potter Years 5 through 7 is probably the weakest of those three. But I think if you're a Potter fan, this one might be worth checking out, but keep your expectations in check. So those were the LEGO games on PSP. Which one out of the games mentioned today is your favorite? The LEGO games have a legacy all of their own, and to me, I think it's crazy this franchise has been around for 20 years, since the release of LEGO Star Wars on March 29th of 2005. Not quite old enough for an alcoholic beverage, so we'll be sticking with the Capri Sun for this one. Plus, with the upcoming release of the new LEGO Batman game, it doesn't look like the franchise is slowing down one bit. Still, what are some of your memories you had with these? Can be positive, negative, or whatever, as there is a lot of nostalgia I feel carried with these titles, and as always, thanks for stopping by.